"You're nothing but street trash." Those words would cost Officer Derek Langford everything he had spent 12 years building. At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Detroit, a routine stop became the moment that would expose decades of corruption, brutality, and a system designed to protect the guilty. The man in handcuffs wasn't who anyone thought he was, and in less than 24 hours, the entire police department would discover that sometimes justice doesn't just knock on your door, it kicks it down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air hung thick with humidity as Officer Derek Langford cruised through the Riverside district in his patrol car, his dashboard camera recording everything ahead while his body cam sat clipped to his vest. Beside him, his partner of 6 years, Officer Kyle Brennan, scrolled through his phone, barely paying attention to the streets they were supposed to be monitoring. Langford had been with the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department for 12 years, working his way up from rookie patrol to senior officer in the department's most troubled precinct. His record showed 847 arrests, countless commendations, and a reputation as someone who got results. What his record didn't show were the 31 formal complaints filed against him, the $890,000 in legal settlements the city had quietly paid out, or the pattern of violence that had marked nearly every one of those 847 arrests. The morning dispatch chatter crackled over the radio. A break-in 3 blocks south, domestic disturbance on Franklin Avenue, suspicious vehicle near the waterfront. Langford ignored all of it, his eyes scanning the sidewalks for what he called opportunities. At the corner of Jefferson and Monroe, he spotted what he was looking for. A black man in his early 40s walked briskly down the sidewalk, dressed in casual athletic wear, a gray hoodie despite the warm morning, dark jeans, and running shoes that had seen better days. He carried a leather messenger bag over one shoulder and kept his head down, moving with purpose toward the nearby metro station. "Look at this guy," Langford muttered to Brennan, slowing the patrol car. "Walking through Riverside at this hour? Probably just finished robbing somebody." Brennan glanced up from his phone and shrugged. "Want to check it out?" Langford was already pulling the car to the curb, his hand moving instinctively to his service weapon to make sure it was secure. This was his pattern, refined over years of stops that always seemed to involve certain types of people in certain types of neighborhoods. The man, whose name was Isaiah Carter, though Langford neither knew nor cared, noticed the patrol car and did exactly what any reasonable person would do when they see police. He kept walking, maintaining his pace, his expression neutral. He had somewhere to be, and a police car sitting at a curb wasn't unusual in this part of Detroit. Langford stepped out of the vehicle, his boots hitting the pavement with deliberate authority. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Isaiah paused, turning slowly to face the officers. His hands remained visible at his sides, his body language careful and controlled. He had lived in Detroit his entire life. He knew exactly how these encounters could escalate. "Morning, officers. Is there a problem?" The politeness in Isaiah's voice only seemed to irritate Langford more. "I'll ask the questions. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "Walking to the metro station," Isaiah replied calmly. "I have an appointment downtown this morning." Langford moved closer, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. "An appointment? At 7 in the morning? Doing what exactly?" Isaiah's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "With all due respect, officer, I don't believe I'm required to answer that question. I'm not breaking any laws." That was the trigger Langford had been waiting for. Anyone who knew their rights was automatically suspicious in his worldview. Anyone who questioned his authority was asking for trouble. "Oh, we got a lawyer here," Langford sneered, glancing back at Brennan, who had now exited the patrol car. "Kyle, looks like we got ourselves one of those sovereign citizen types who think they know the law better than actual cops." Brennan took up position on Isaiah's other side, creating a tactical formation that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with intimidation. "Sir, the officer asked you a simple question. Why are you being difficult?" "I'm not being difficult," Isaiah responded, his voice still controlled but now carrying an edge of frustration. "I'm walking to the metro station to get to work. That's not a crime." Langford stepped even closer, invading Isaiah's personal space in a move designed to provoke. "Work? What kind of work? You dealing drugs, running numbers, or maybe you're heading downtown to case some businesses?" The assumptions came naturally to Langford after 12 years of viewing every black man in certain neighborhoods as a potential criminal. His training had taught him about probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and constitutional rights. His experience on the force had taught him that none of that mattered if you knew how to control the narrative afterward.
"Officer, I'm asking you politely to let me continue on my way," Isaiah said. "I haven't committed any crime, and you have no legal reason to detain me." Langford's face flushed red. That tone, calm, educated, assertive, was everything he hated. It challenged his authority. It suggested that this man thought he was equal or even superior to a police officer. "I decide what's legal and what's not on these streets," Langford shot back. "Now I'm going to ask you one more time. What's in the bag?" Isaiah's messenger bag contained his tablet, several file folders, his wallet, and the materials he needed for the meeting scheduled at police headquarters that morning. But he also knew that reaching for the bag to show its contents could be interpreted as reaching for a weapon. "Personal belongings, nothing illegal." "Then you won't mind if I take a look," Langford stated, reaching for the bag. Isaiah took a single step backward, maintaining space. "Actually, I do mind. You don't have probable cause to search my property." That step backward was all Langford needed. He lunged forward, grabbing Isaiah's arm with enough force to spin him around. Brennan moved in immediately, taking Isaiah's other arm as both officers slammed him face first against the brick wall of a nearby building. "Resisting arrest," Langford announced loudly, his voice carrying down the empty street. "Kyle, you see him try to flee?" "I saw it," Brennan confirmed automatically, his response practiced and instant. Isaiah's face pressed against the rough brick, his arms wrenched behind his back with unnecessary force. "I'm not resisting, I'm not fleeing. You're assaulting me without cause." Langford's knee drove into Isaiah's lower back, pinning him against the wall. "Shut your mouth, street trash. You don't get to tell me what's legal." The messenger bag fell to the sidewalk, its contents spilling out. File folders marked with official police department letterhead scattered across the concrete. A tablet in a leather case landed near the gutter. Most significantly, an identification badge with a gold shield clattered onto the sidewalk, landing face up, where both officers could have seen it if they had been paying attention. But they weren't looking at Isaiah's belongings. They were too focused on asserting dominance, on teaching a lesson to someone who had dared to question their authority. "You're nothing but street trash," Langford hissed, directly into Isaiah's ear as he wrenched the handcuffs onto his wrists with deliberate tightness. "People like you need to learn respect, need to learn that when a cop tells you to do something, you do it, without question." Isaiah's breathing was controlled despite the pain radiating through his shoulders and back. "Officer Langford, I strongly suggest you check my identification before this situation gets any worse for you." "Worse for me," Langford laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the buildings. "You're the one going to jail, friend." A few early morning pedestrians had stopped to watch from a safe distance. One woman pulled out her phone and began recording. Langford noticed, but didn't care. In his experience, civilian video never mattered. The department always backed the officer's version of events. "Kyle, check his pockets for weapons," Langford ordered, maintaining pressure on Isaiah's back. Brennan patted down Isaiah roughly, finding only a wallet, keys, and a phone. "No weapons," he announced. "Of course no weapons," Isaiah said through gritted teeth. Because I'm not a criminal, I don't care what you think you are, Langford interrupted. You're a suspect who resisted lawful commands and attempted to flee from police officers. That's felony evasion. He jerked Isaiah away from the wall and shoved him toward the patrol car. Isaiah stumbled but maintained his footing, his hands cuffed behind his back, making it impossible to catch himself properly. "This is your last chance to identify yourself correctly," Isaiah said as Langford opened the back door of the patrol car. "My name is Isaiah Carter, and you need to contact Captain Beverly Holloway immediately." The name meant nothing to Langford. Beverly Holloway was the captain of the department's Internal Affairs Division, but Langford had successfully avoided any meaningful interaction with IA for years. His complaints always got buried, his incidents always got explained away, and his arrests always stuck, regardless of the circumstances. "I don't care what you think you are," Langford snarled as he wrenched Isaiah's head down as he pushed him into the back seat. "You're going to booking, then to a cell, and then you're going to learn what happens to people who disrespect law enforcement." Isaiah sat in the back of the patrol car, his hands cuffed painfully tight behind his back, his face throbbing from the impact with the brick wall. Through the window, he could see his scattered belongings on the sidewalk, including the identification badge that neither officer had bothered to examine.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Brennan gathered up the messenger bag and its contents, shoving everything inside without looking at any of it. He tossed the bag into the patrol car's trunk, then climbed into the passenger seat. "What do you want to book him for?" Brennan asked as Langford settled behind the wheel. "Resisting arrest, evasion, failure to comply with lawful orders, and let's add disorderly conduct for good measure," Langford replied, already constructing the narrative in his mind. Guy was acting suspicious in a high-crime area, refused to identify himself, attempted to flee when detained, and became physically aggressive when we tried to conduct a lawful investigation. None of it was true, but truth had never been a priority in Langford's reports. What mattered was the story that would hold up in court, the narrative that would justify his actions and protect him from any consequences. In the back seat, Isaiah closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath. In approximately 3 hours, he was scheduled to be formally introduced as the new police commissioner of the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department. His first official act was supposed to be addressing the command staff about his plans for comprehensive reform, accountability measures, and rebuilding community trust. Instead, he was handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, arrested by officers who exemplified every problem he had been hired to fix. The irony wasn't lost on him. Neither was the opportunity. "Officer Langford," Isaiah said quietly, his voice carrying a new tone that made Brennan glance back nervously. "When we get to the station, I want you to remember something. You had multiple chances to do this correctly. You chose violence and lies instead. That choice is going to define the rest of your career." Langford caught Isaiah's eyes in the rearview mirror and sneered. "The only thing defining my career today is adding another arrest to my record. Now shut up before I add threatening an officer your charges." The patrol car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the scattered evidence of what had just occurred. The woman who had been recording uploaded her video to social media with a caption about police brutality in Detroit. Within minutes, it had dozens of shares. But the real story, the one that would shake the entire department to its foundation, was just beginning. The booking area of the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department's 5th Precinct was a fluorescent-lit maze of holding cells, processing desks, and overworked staff who had seen thousands of arrests blur together into a numbing routine. Officer Derek Langford walked Isaiah Carter through the heavy steel doors with the confident swagger of someone who had performed this ritual hundreds of times before. Sergeant Paula Vincent looked up from her computer terminal as Langford approached her desk. The booking sergeant had worked the overnight shift for 9 years, processing everything from drunk drivers to murder suspects with the same tired efficiency. Her desk was cluttered with half-empty coffee cups and arrest forms waiting for her signature. "What do we've got, Langford?" she asked, her fingers already poised over her keyboard to begin the intake process. Resisting arrest, evasion, failure to comply with lawful orders, and let's add disorderly conduct for good measure, Langford replied, already constructing the narrative in his mind. Guy was acting suspicious in a high-crime area, refused to identify himself, attempted to flee when detained, and became physically aggressive when we tried to conduct a lawful investigation. None of it was true, but truth had never been a priority in Langford's reports. What mattered was the story that would hold up in court, the narrative that would justify his actions and protect him from any consequences. In the back seat, Isaiah stood silently, his hands still cuffed behind his back, a visible bruise forming on his left cheekbone where his face had connected with the brick wall. His expression remained neutral, almost serene, which only seemed to irritate Langford more. "Name," Vincent said mechanically, not even looking at Isaiah as she typed. "Isaiah Carter." "Address." Isaiah provided his information calmly and clearly, his voice carrying none of the anger or fear that typically accompanied arrestees at this stage. Vincent's fingers paused momentarily over her keyboard. Something about the name tickled the back of her memory, but with her exhaustion and the dozens of other arrests she had processed that night, she couldn't quite place it. "Officer Langford, did you recover any identification from the suspect?" Vincent asked, following standard protocol. "Everything's in the evidence bag," Langford replied dismissively, dropping Isaiah's messenger bag on the counter. "Wallet should be in there somewhere." Vincent opened the bag and began cataloging its contents. One leather wallet containing a driver's license, credit cards, and $73 cash. One tablet computer in a protective case. Multiple file folders with... She paused, pulling out one of the folders and examining the official Detroit Police Department letterhead. "These are internal department documents. Where did these come from?" "They were in his possession. Probably stole them from someone. Add theft of government property to the charges." Isaiah finally spoke, his voice cutting through the booking area's background noise with unexpected authority. "Sergeant Vincent, I strongly recommend you look at my driver's license and compare it to the department's personnel database before the situation escalates further." Vincent's hand moved toward the wallet, but Langford interceded quickly. "Don't listen to him, Paula. Guy's been playing games since we picked him up, acting like he's somebody important, making vague threats, trying to intimidate us with legal talk." Kyle Brennan, who had been standing quietly near the door, shifted his weight uncomfortably. Something about Isaiah's demeanor was beginning to penetrate the fog of his complicity. The man didn't act like the typical suspects they arrested. There was no panic, no pleading, no anger, just a calm certainty that was frankly unsettling. "Derek, maybe we should check his ID," Brendan suggested tentatively. "Just to be thorough." Langford shot his partner a withering glare. "We'll check it during processing. Right now, I need to write up my report while everything's fresh." The report was the key element in Langford's system of protection. Over his 12 years on the force, he had refined his narrative construction to an art form. The reports always told the same basic story with slight variations. Suspicious behavior, lawful top, suspect resistance, necessary force, lawful arrest. The formula had protected him through 31 formal complaints and counting. He moved to an empty desk in the corner of the booking area and opened a fresh arrest report form on the computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he constructed the fiction that would become the official record of the morning's events. At approximately 0647 hours, Officer Brennan and I were conducting routine patrol in Riverside District when we observed a male subject exhibiting suspicious behavior near the intersection of Jefferson and Monroe. The subject was dressed in clothing commonly associated with criminal activity, including a hood covering his face despite warm weather conditions. None of this was accurate. Isaiah's hoodie was unzipped and pushed back. The weather was humid, but not particularly warm, and looking suspicious wasn't a crime, though Langford had built his career on pretending it was. Upon initiating contact, the subject became immediately hostile and evasive. When asked to provide identification, he refused multiple lawful commands and began backing away in an apparent attempt to flee.
Fearing for our safety and believing the subject may have been armed, we attempted to detain him for further investigation. The subject actively resisted detention, pulling away from officers and reaching towards his waistband in a threatening manner. Physical force was necessary to secure the subject and ensure officer safety. Subject was handcuffed and searched, revealing stolen police department documents in his possession.
Every sentence was a calculated distortion. Isaiah hadn't pulled away, Langford had grabbed him. Isaiah hadn't reached for his waistband, he had tried to step backward. The documents weren't stolen, they belonged to him. But Langford knew from experience that his version would be the one that mattered. Police reports carried weight in the system. Civilian testimony didn't. Video evidence could be explained away. And by the time any investigation occurred, if one occurred at all, the narrative would be set in stone. Across the booking area, Sergeant Vincent had finally opened Isaiah's wallet and was staring at his driver's license with growing confusion. She pulled up the department's personnel database on her computer and typed in his name. Her screen filled with information that made her breath catch in her throat. She read it twice, then 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her eyes moved from the screen to Isaiah's face and back again. "Officer Langford," she called out, her voice carrying an edge of panic. "You need to come here right now." Langford looked up from his report, annoyed at the interruption. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of documentation." "No, it absolutely cannot wait." Vincent's face had gone pale. "Derek, get over here now." The urgency in her voice finally penetrated Langford's confidence. He stood and walked back to the booking desk, irritation written across his features. "What's the problem?" Vincent turned her computer monitor so he could see the screen. "The problem is that you just arrested the new police commissioner." The words didn't register immediately. Langford stared at the screen, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Isaiah Carter's personnel file filled the display, complete with his official photograph, his credentials, and his appointment details. Scheduled to begin duty as police commissioner effective this date. Background includes 15 years with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, specializing in police misconduct investigations. Master's degree in criminal justice from Harvard. Numerous commendations for integrity and service. "That's impossible," Langford whispered, his voice hollow. Isaiah spoke from his position at the counter, his hands still cuffed behind his back. "I tried to tell you multiple times who I was. You chose not to listen. You chose to assume I was a criminal based solely on my appearance and your own prejudices." Langford's world was tilting sideways. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Behind him, Kyle Brennan had gone completely white, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of what they had done. "The messenger bag," Vincent said quietly, pulling out more documents. "These aren't stolen. These are his briefing materials, his meeting notes, his appointment letter from the mayor's office." She held up the identification badge that had fallen on the sidewalk, the one neither officer had bothered to examine. Official police commissioner credentials, issued 3 days ago. The booking area had gone silent. Other officers who had been processing their own arrests were now staring at the unfolding disaster. Word spread through the station with the speed of wildfire. The new commissioner had been arrested by one of their own on his first day. "Sergeant Vincent," Isaiah said calmly, despite his obvious discomfort from the too tight handcuffs, "I need you to contact Captain Beverly Holloway immediately. She's expecting me for a briefing at 0900 hours. Vincent nodded mutely and reached for her phone. Her hands were shaking as she dialed. Langford stood frozen, his career flashing before his eyes. 12 years of arrests, of complaints brushed aside, of settlements quietly paid, of violence justified and protected.
all of it suddenly exposed and vulnerable, because he had assaulted the one person who had the authority and the motivation to tear down the entire corrupt system. "I didn't know," he finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Isaiah turned to face him fully, and for the first time that morning, his expression showed genuine emotion. Anger, disappointment, and something else that might have been pity. "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Isaiah said quietly. "You didn't know because you saw a black man in a hoodie and immediately assumed criminal. You didn't know because in 12 years on this force, you've never once considered that the people you brutalize might be human beings deserving of basic dignity and respect." The truth of it hit Langford like a physical blow. He had built his entire career on assumptions, on prejudices so deeply ingrained he didn't even recognize them as prejudices anymore. They were just the way things were, the natural order of the streets as he understood them. Brennan moved towards Isaiah, his hands reaching for the handcuffs. "Commissioner Carter, sir, let me get those off you. I'm so sorry, we didn't—" "Don't touch me," Isaiah interrupted sharply. "And don't apologize. Your apology means nothing. You stood by and watched your partner assault an innocent man. You corroborated his lies. You participated in every step of this abuse." Brennan's hands fell to his sides, his face crumpling. Vincent hung up her phone. "Captain Holloway is on her way. She said to tell you she's bringing the deputy chief and the mayor's liaison." Isaiah nodded good. "I want witnesses for what comes next." Langford found his voice again, desperation creeping in. "Commissioner Carter, sure, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I was just doing my job, trying to keep the community safe." "By assaulting people without cause?" Isaiah's voice cut through the booking area like a knife. "By fabricating charges? By assuming every black man you see is a threat? That's not keeping anyone safe, Officer Langford. That's terrorism with a badge." The word terrorism hung in the air. Several officers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth of it, even if they couldn't admit it aloud. "Sergeant Vincent," Isaiah continued, still addressing her rather than Langford, "I want you to preserve all evidence related to this arrest. The body camera footage, the dash cam footage, any security cameras that might have captured the incident, everything." Vincent nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, absolutely. Also pull Officer Langford's complete service record, every arrest, every complaint, every use of force report. I want it all on my desk by noon." Langford's knees felt weak. His service record was a roadmap of abuse, carefully hidden under layers of bureaucratic protection and departmental cover-ups. Under serious scrutiny, it would be devastating. "Sir," he tried again, his voice breaking, "please, I have a wife, 2 kids, this job is everything to me." Isaiah's expression didn't soften. "You should have thought about that before you slammed my face into a wall and called me street trash. You should have thought about that before you falsified your report. You should have thought about that during any of the other 846 arrests where you apparently behaved the same way." "How did you—" Langford started, then stopped. Of course, the new commissioner would have reviewed personnel files before taking the position. Of course, he would have seen the patterns, the complaints, the settlements. "I know everything about you, Officer Langford. Your arrest record, your complaint history, your use of force statistics. Do you want to know why I know all of this in such detail?" Langford couldn't speak. He could barely breathe.
"Because officers like you are exactly why I took this job. I came to Detroit specifically to clean out the rot, to hold accountable the people who have turned this department into a machine that terrorizes the very communities it's supposed to serve." The booking area door opened, and Captain Beverly Holloway strode in, followed by Deputy Chief Richard Sutton and a woman in civilian clothes carrying a city government credential. All three stopped short when they saw Isaiah still standing in handcuffs at the booking counter. "What in God's name?" Holloway began, her voice sharp with fury. "Good morning, Captain," Isaiah said calmly. "I apologize for missing our scheduled briefing. I was unexpectedly detained by two of your officers." The phrase, "your officers," carried accusatory weight that made Holloway's jaw clench. She turned to Langford with an expression of pure rage. "Someone explain to me why the new police commissioner is standing in booking wearing handcuffs." Sergeant Vincent, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination, finally unlocked Isaiah's handcuffs herself. The metal fell away, revealing deep red marks on his wrists where they had been cinched too tight. Isaiah rubbed his wrists slowly, his eyes never leaving Langford's face. The officer saw a black man walking to work and decided he looked suspicious. When I exercised my constitutional rights, he assaulted me, fabricated charges, and arrested me. His partner participated and corroborated the lies. Deputy Chief Sutton's face turned purple. "Langford, Brennan, you're both suspended effective immediately. Turn in your badges and weapons." Langford's hand moved automatically to his badge, the piece of metal that had given him authority and protection for 12 years. Removing it felt like removing a part of his identity. "Actually," Isaiah interjected, his voice carrying command authority that froze everyone in place, "I want them both to remain on duty for now." Everyone stared at him in confusion. "I want them to experience what comes next," Isaiah explained. "I want them to watch as we investigate every arrest they've made, every report they've filed, every complaint that was buried. I want them to see the full scope of the damage they've caused." He turned to face Langford directly, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You thought you could hide behind your badge forever, Officer Langford. You thought the system would always protect you. Today, you're going to learn what it feels like when the system stops protecting the guilty and starts protecting the innocent." The booking area remained silent as the full weight of Isaiah's words settled over everyone present. This wasn't just about one bad arrest. This was about systematic change, accountability, and the complete transformation of a department that had lost its way. And it was only just beginning. The conference room on the 4th floor of Detroit Metropolitan Police Headquarters had become an impromptu war room. Captain Beverly Holloway had cleared the space within minutes of the booking area revelation, ushering Isaiah Carter and the key witnesses upstairs while the rest of the precinct buzzed with rumors about what had transpired. Isaiah sat at the head of the long table, his bruised cheek now cleaned and documented by the department's medical staff. A photographer had taken 17 images of his injuries from multiple angles, evidence that would prove critical in the coming days. His suit jacket hung on a nearby chair, replaced temporarily by a white shirt that made the marks on his wrists from the too tight handcuffs stand out in sharp relief. Isaiah rubbed his wrists slowly, his eyes never leaving Langford's face. "Commissioner Carter," Holloway said, breaking the tense silence, "I need to be frank with you. What happened this morning isn't an isolated incident. Langford has been a problem for years." Isaiah leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Tell me something I don't know, Captain. I've read his file. 31 complaints, 12 excessive force citations, and 8 civil settlements totaling nearly $1 million. The question isn't whether he's a problem. The question is why he's still wearing a badge." Holloway's jaw tightened. She had been with Internal Affairs for 7 years, watching good officers get driven out while officers like Langford flourished under a system that protected the guilty and punished the righteous. Political pressure, union protection, and command staff who value arrest numbers over constitutional policing, she said bluntly. "Every time I tried to move forward with disciplinary action, the file got kicked upstairs and came back stamped insufficient evidence or resolved through counseling." Isaiah pulled out his tablet and opened a document he had been compiling for weeks before officially taking the commissioner position. The screen showed a network diagram connecting Langford to dozens of other officers, supervisors, and command staff members. "Officer Langford doesn't operate in a vacuum," Isaiah said, turning the tablet so Holloway could see. He has a protection network. 12 officers who consistently corroborate his reports. 4 supervisors who routinely approve his use of force documentation. 2 union representatives who threatened litigation every time someone questions his conduct. Holloway studied the diagram with growing recognition. She had seen these patterns before, but never mapped out so explicitly. This is a conspiracy. It's systematic corruption, Isaiah corrected, and Langford is just the most visible symptom of a much deeper disease. Deputy Chief Sutton ended his call and returned to the table. The mayor is furious. She wants a press conference by noon, addressing the incident and announcing immediate reforms. Isaiah shook his head. No press conference yet. If we go public now, we give the union time to rally support and craft their narrative. We need to move faster than they can react. He stood and walked to a whiteboard mounted on the conference room wall. Taking a marker, he began outlining a strategy that had clearly been forming in his mind long before this morning's confrontation. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 15 years investigating police corruption for the FBI. "First, Captain Holloway, I need you to pull every case file where Langford was the primary arresting officer over the past 5 years. Every single one." "That's over 400 cases," Holloway protested. "Then you'd better get started." Isaiah's tone left no room for negotiation. "I want particular attention paid to cases that resulted in plea bargains, dismissed charges, or suppressed evidence motions." Sutton scribbled notes on his own tablet. "What are you looking for specifically?" "Patterns of fabricated evidence, coerced confessions, unlawful searches, and civil rights violations that prosecutors overlooked because convictions were more important than justice." Isaiah wrote the phrase "systematic review" in large letters on the whiteboard. He said, "Second, I want Sergeant Vincent to pull all body camera and dash camera footage involving Langford from the past year. All of it, not just the incidents that generated complaints." "That could be hundreds of hours of video," Holloway said. "I'm aware. I'm also aware that body cameras have a habit of malfunctioning during Langford's most questionable arrests, which is why I also want all maintenance records for his equipment, all reports of technical difficulties, and all footage that was supposedly lost due to equipment failure." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the scope of what Isaiah was proposing. This wasn't just about one bad arrest or one corrupt officer. This was about dismantling an entire system of protection that had allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. "Third," Isaiah said, drawing lines connecting different elements on his whiteboard diagram, "I want financial records. Langford makes $67,000 a year as a senior patrol officer, yet he owns a home valued at $450,000, drives a truck worth $70,000, and takes 3 vacations a year to destinations that cost more than his monthly salary." "You think he's taking money?" Sutton asked. "I think there are additional income sources that need explaining," Isaiah capped his marker. "Whether that's overtime fraud, civil asset forfeiture abuse, or outright theft doesn't matter right now. What matters is building a comprehensive case that can't be dismissed or minimized." Holloway closed her laptop and looked directly at Isaiah. "Commissioner, with all due respect, what you're proposing will take weeks or even months to compile. Are you really planning to keep Langford on duty during all of this?" Isaiah returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. "Langford represents a cancer in this department. But if we simply cut him out without understanding how deep the disease goes, it will grow back. I need him functioning normally, interacting with his network, conducting business as usual." "He's a liability," Sutton objected. "What if he hurts someone else?" "Then we document it," Isaiah said coldly, "and we add it to the mountain of evidence that's going to bury him and everyone who enabled him." The bluntness of the statement shocked everyone in the room. This wasn't the reformer they had expected, someone who would come in with sensitivity training proposals and community outreach programs. This was a strategist who understood that real change required exposing corruption so thoroughly that no one could deny it or defend it. "There's something else," Isaiah said, pulling up a new file on his tablet. 3 months ago, I received a call from an attorney named Marcus Webb. He represents 17 plaintiffs who claim they were brutalized by Detroit police officers over the past decade. 11 of those 17 specifically name Derek Langford. A civil suit? Holloway asked. A federal civil rights lawsuit seeking $42 million in damages. Isaiah slid printed copies of the complaint across the table. The plaintiffs include a grandmother who was body slammed during a traffic stop, a teenager who was beaten unconscious for talking back, and a veteran who was tased repeatedly because he had a prosthetic leg that set off a metal detector. Each case detailed acts of violence so extreme they seemed impossible, yet the documentation was thorough. Medical records, witness statements, and in several cases, video evidence that had somehow never made it into criminal proceedings. "This lawsuit is why I took this job," Isaiah said quietly. "The mayor called me 6 weeks ago, terrified that this case would expose the department to scrutiny it couldn't survive. She wanted someone with federal credentials who could come in and implement reforms before the trial." Sutton looked ill. "Does the lawsuit mention this morning's incident?" "Not yet, but it will." Isaiah touched his bruised cheek gently. "I'm going to be plaintiff number 18, and unlike the others, I have the power to force discovery, compel testimony, and access every buried file this department has tried to hide." Holloway understood immediately what Isaiah was doing. He was using his own victimization as a catalyst, a way to force open investigations that had been blocked by bureaucracy and corruption for years. "The union is going to fight this with everything they have," she warned. "Let them fight," Isaiah replied. "I spent 15 years with the FBI taking down corrupt police departments in 7 different cities. I faced unions, political machines, and command staff who thought they were untouchable. They all learned the same lesson eventually." "What lesson is that?" Sutton asked. "That justice doesn't care about your connections, your seniority, or how many officers show up to your disciplinary hearing." Isaiah stood again, this time with finality. "It only cares about evidence and truth. And starting today, this department is going to learn to care about the same things." He walked to the door, then paused and looked back at the assembled group. "Captain Holloway, I want that case file review started within the hour. Deputy Chief Sutton, coordinate with the mayor's office, but keep them at arm's length. I don't want political interference clouding the investigation. And someone finds an empty office where I can work. Apparently, I have a department to rebuild." As Isaiah left the conference room, Holloway and Sutton exchanged glances. They had expected a new commissioner who would make speeches about reform and change. Instead, they had gotten a tactician who was about to wage war on the corruption that had infected their department for decades. And Derek Langford, still on duty downstairs and completely unaware of the storm gathering above him, had become the first target in a campaign that would shake the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department to its foundation. The real work was just beginning. Officer Derek Langford sat in the precinct break room, his untouched coffee growing cold on the table in front of him. Kyle Brennan occupied the chair across from him, staring at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. Neither man had spoken in 20 minutes. The break room had emptied quickly after they entered. Other officers found sudden reasons to be elsewhere, reports to file, calls to make, anything to avoid being associated with the 2 men who had arrested the new police commissioner. The isolation was immediate and total. Langford's phone buzzed the 37th time in 2 hours. Text messages from other officers flooded his screen, each one a variation on the same theme. "What were you thinking? Do you know what you've done? You've put a target on all of us." The union representative Vincenz Castellano had called 4 times, but Langford couldn't bring himself to answer. What could he possibly say? That he'd assaulted his new boss on site? That he'd fabricated charges against the one person with the authority to destroy his career? The break room television was tuned to a local news channel, its volume low but audible. The afternoon anchor was discussing breaking news about changes at the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department. Sources inside the department confirm that new Commissioner Isaiah Carter began his first day this morning with an unscheduled inspection of booking procedures at the 5th Precinct. Details remain unclear, but multiple officers have been placed under administrative review. Administrative review. The words made Langford's stomach churn. That was department code for career-ending investigation. Brennan finally broke the silence. Derek, we need to get ahead of this. Maybe if we apologize, explain that it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Langford interrupted flatly. I profiled him, assaulted him, and lied about it. There's no way to spin that into something forgivable. The honesty surprised even Langford himself. For 12 years, he had spun everything. Every complaint, every use of force incident, every lawsuit. He had become so skilled at crafting alternative narratives that he sometimes forgot what the truth actually looked like.
But there was no narrative that could explain away this morning. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too numerous, and most damning of all, the victim had the power to ensure accountability couldn't be avoided. The break room door opened and Sergeant Vincent entered, her expression grim. She walked directly to their table and dropped 2 thin folders in front of them. "Your duty assignments for the remainder of the week," she said coldly. "You're both on administrative tasks. No patrol, no arrests, no contact with the public." Langford opened his folder. Inside was a single sheet detailing his new responsibilities: filing historical case reports, organizing evidence logs, and assisting with records digitization. It was make work, the kind of assignment given to officers waiting for termination proceedings. "Why are we still on duty at all?" Brennan asked. "Why didn't the commissioner just suspend us?" Vincent's expression suggested she had been wondering the same thing. "I don't know, but I'd suggest you both keep your heads down and follow orders precisely. Whatever the commissioner is planning, antagonizing him further would be suicide." She left without another word, leaving the folders as physical reminders of how completely their circumstances had changed. 3 floors above, in a borrowed office that still smelled of fresh paint, Isaiah Carter was conducting his first official meetings as police commissioner. Captain Holloway had assembled a team of analysts, investigators, and technology specialists who were now spread throughout the room, each focused on different aspects of the comprehensive review Isaiah had ordered. "Talk to me about the body camera footage," Isaiah said to a young technical analyst named Jordan Hayes. Hayes pulled up a series of files on a large monitor. "Commissioner, we've reviewed 47 incidents involving Officer Langford over the past 18 months. Of those 47, his body camera experienced technical difficulties in 19 cases. 19 equipment failures out of 47 uses," Isaiah observed. "What's the department average failure rate?" Hayes consulted another screen. "Department-wide, body cameras fail in approximately 3% of deployments. Officer Langford's equipment fails in 40% of his deployments. And let me guess," Isaiah continued, "those failures occurred disproportionately during his most aggressive encounters." Hayes nodded grimly. 16 of the 19 failures occurred during incidents that resulted in use-of-force reports, civilian complaints, or both. Isaiah turned to another analyst. "What about the dash camera footage from his patrol car?" Analyst Rebecca Torres pulled up her own data. "Similar pattern, Commissioner. Officer Langford's patrol car cameras have experienced 11 documented failures in the past year. His partner vehicles in the motor pool? 2 failures total among all of them combined." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed what the data was revealing. This wasn't bad luck or faulty equipment. This was systematic evidence destruction. Holloway stood near the whiteboard where Isaiah had sketched his initial network diagram. "We pulled the financial records you requested. Langford's bank statements show regular deposits beyond his department salary. Most are listed as security consulting payments from a company called Guardian Protection Services." Isaiah's eyes narrowed. "I know that company. They provide private security for businesses in high-crime areas. Very aggressive policies, multiple brutality complaints. Who owns it?" Holloway pulled up a business registration document. On paper, it's owned by someone named Marcus Tolliver, but Tolliver is a front. The actual beneficial owner is... She paused, her finger hovering over a name that made several people in the room gasp. Lieutenant Gregory Walsh, she finished. Langford's direct supervisor for the past 6 years. The implications crystallized immediately. Langford wasn't just a rogue officer operating independently. He was part of a network that extended into the command structure with financial incentives that rewarded aggressive policing and discouraged accountability. "How much money are we talking about?" Isaiah asked. Holloway consulted her notes. Langford has received $93,000 from Guardian Protection Services over the past 3 years. 8 other officers show similar payment patterns, totaling over $500,000. Isaiah stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Below, Detroit went about its daily business, unaware that the department supposedly protecting them had become riddled with corruption. "Who else knows about this?" Isaiah asked quietly. "Just us," Holloway replied. "I pulled the records using commissioner-level authority. No one outside this room has seen them." Isaiah turned back to face the assembled team. "Keep it that way. I want complete documentation before we move. Financial records, communication logs, deployment patterns, everything that connects Langford to Walsh to Guardian Protection Services." Deputy Chief Sutton entered the office carrying a thick accordion folder. "Commissioner, you asked for Langford's arrest files. I've got the last 5 years here. 418 cases total." Isaiah took the folder and opened it, pulling out case summaries at random. Each one told a similar story: aggressive stop, suspect resistance, necessary force, lawful arrest. The narratives were practically identical, differentiated only by names and dates. "How many of these cases went to trial?" Isaiah asked. Sutton consulted a summary sheet. 47 trials, 371 plea bargains. "And of those trials, how many resulted in convictions?" 43 convictions, 4 acquittals. Isaiah pulled out the 4 acquittal files and spread them on the desk. "These are the ones that got away, the cases where defense attorneys successfully challenged Langford's credibility. I want to talk to every defense attorney who won these cases." "Commissioner, one of those attorneys is Marcus Webb, the same attorney handling the federal civil rights lawsuit against the department." Isaiah smiled grimly. "Then Mr. Webb and I have a great deal to discuss." He turned back to the monitor displaying Langford's body camera failures. "For 12 years, this department has protected Officer Langford. Union representatives have threatened litigation. Supervisors have buried complaints. Command staff has prioritized arrest statistics over constitutional policing." The room was utterly silent, everyone sensing that something significant was about to be said. "That protection ends today. By the end of this week, I want a complete case file on Derek Langford that documents every civil rights violation, every falsified report, every piece of destroyed evidence. I want it thorough enough to present to a federal grand jury." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He found the number he was looking for and dialed. The answer was answered immediately. "Agent Morrison, this is Isaiah Carter. I need to invoke our previous arrangement. The Detroit Metropolitan Police Department has a corruption problem that extends beyond what we initially discussed. I'm formally requesting FBI assistance under federal civil rights statutes."
The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When it ended, Isaiah set down his phone and looked at his assembled team. In 72 hours, federal agents will be walking through that door. They'll have subpoena power, surveillance authority, and jurisdiction over every case where civil rights violations occurred. What we document between now and then will determine how many officers go down with Langford. Holloway's expression was a mixture of determination and apprehension. This is going to tear the department apart.
Isaiah's response was immediate and unflinching. Good, because the department that exists right now deserves to be torn apart. What we build in its place will actually serve the community instead of terrorizing it. 3 floors below, Derek Langford was filing reports in a windowless office, completely unaware that the investigation into his conduct had already expanded far beyond this morning's incident. He didn't know about the federal agents being mobilized. He didn't know about the financial records being analyzed. He didn't know that his entire career was being systematically deconstructed by the very man he had brutalized hours earlier. But he was about to find out. The storm was gathering, and Derek Langford was standing directly in its path. The 5th-floor conference room had been transformed into a command center. Whiteboards lined every wall, covered with photographs, timelines, and connection diagrams that mapped out years of corruption. Digital monitors displayed financial transactions, case files, and video evidence that painted a damning picture of systematic abuse. Isaiah Carter stood at the center of it all, orchestrating the investigation with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. 72 hours had passed since his arrest, and in that time, his team had compiled evidence that would have taken most departments months to gather. Attorney Marcus Webb sat at the conference table, his own files spread before him. The civil rights lawyer had been working on the Detroit police brutality cases for 3 years, collecting testimonies from victims who had been ignored, dismissed, or intimidated into silence. Attorney Carter, Webb said, reviewing the financial documents Isaiah's team had uncovered, "This is extraordinary work. Guardian Protection Services is the missing link I've been searching for. It explains why so many officers were incentivized to make aggressive arrests in specific neighborhoods." Isaiah nodded, pointing to a map of Detroit on one of the monitors. The company operates exclusively in low-income areas with majority Black and Latino populations. They pay officers for off-duty security work, but the real money comes from civil asset forfeitures that get funneled through shell companies. Webb pulled up his own documentation. "I represent a man named Terrence Johnson, who lost his car, his savings, and his small business inventory in a single traffic stop. Officer Langford was the arresting officer. The charges were eventually dropped, but Mr. Johnson never recovered his property, because Guardian Protection Services claimed it as abandoned assets and sold it at auction," Isaiah finished. "We've traced 17 similar cases in the past 2 years alone. Total value of seized assets, over $3 million. The door opened, and FBI Special Agent Linda Morrison entered, followed by 2 other FBI agents carrying evidence boxes. She had been Isaiah's colleague during his years with the Bureau, and their professional relationship had made this investigation possible. "We executed search warrants on Guardian Protection Services this morning," Morrison announced, setting down a laptop. "What we found is going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable." She opened the laptop and displayed a series of spreadsheets. "These are payment ledgers showing cash distributions to 43 Detroit police officers over the past 5 years. Total payments exceed $2 million. Captain Holloway, who had been cross-referencing case files at another workstation, looked up sharply. 43 officers? This is bigger than we thought." Isaiah moved to examine the spreadsheets more closely. "Who are the top earners?" Morrison highlighted several names. Derek Langford tops the list at $93,000. His partner Kyle Brennan received $47,000. But the real surprise is here. She pointed to a name that made everyone in the room go silent. Lieutenant Gregory Walsh received $360,000 over 5 years. He's not just facilitating corruption, he's running it. Deputy Chief Sutton, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Walsh is scheduled for promotion to captain next month. The ceremony is already planned." Isaiah's expression hardened. "Cancel it. As of this moment, Lieutenant Walsh is suspended pending federal investigation. I want his office sealed, his computers impounded, and his communications monitored." Sutton pulled out his phone to make the necessary calls, his hand shaking slightly. This was the moment when the investigation stopped being about one bad officer and became about dismantling an entire criminal enterprise operating within the police department. "What about the union?" Holloway asked. "Vincent Castellano has been calling every hour demanding to speak with you about Langford and Brennan." Isaiah turned to face her. "Tell Mr. Castellano that if he wants to discuss Officer Langford's situation, he's welcome to attend the press conference I'm holding tomorrow at 10 a.m. He'll learn everything at the same time as the public." "A press conference?" Webb's eyebrows rose. "You're going public with all of this?" Isaiah walked to the window overlooking downtown Detroit. Every building represented lives. Families who had been terrorized by officers they should have been able to trust. Communities that had learned to fear the police instead of relying on them. "For years, this department has operated in darkness," Isaiah said quietly. "Complaints got buried, evidence disappeared, victims were silenced. That darkness is what allowed this corruption to flourish." He turned back to face the room. "Tomorrow morning, we will turn on the lights. Every case, every payment, every destroyed piece of evidence, all of it becomes public record." Morrison closed her laptop. "Commissioner, I should warn you that going public this quickly will create significant backlash. The union will claim you're conducting a witch hunt. Officers will accuse you of destroying careers. Politicians will worry about the department's reputation." Isaiah's response was immediate. "I don't care about the department's reputation. I care about the 17 people Marcus Webb represents who were brutalized by officers who thought they were untouchable. I care about the hundreds of others who never filed complaints because they knew it wouldn't matter." He walked back to the center of the room, his presence commanding absolute attention. "Tomorrow morning, Derek Langford is going to stand in front of cameras and microphones while I explain exactly what he did. Not just to me, but to everyone else he victimized during 12 years of unchecked violence." "And Lieutenant Walsh?" Holloway asked. Isaiah pulled up a new document on one of the monitors, a federal indictment with Walsh's name prominently displayed. "Agent Morrison's team will arrest him tonight. By morning, he'll be in federal custody facing charges of racketeering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to commit fraud."
The room absorbed this information in stunned silence. They had known the investigation was serious, but arresting a lieutenant was a seismic event that would reverberate throughout the entire department. Webb gathered his files and stood. "Commissioner Carter, I need to contact my clients. They deserve to know that justice is finally coming." Isaiah nodded. "Tell them I'll be contacting each of them personally. Their testimony will be crucial, not just for the criminal cases, but for the comprehensive reform this department desperately needs." As Webb left, Holloway approached Isaiah with a tablet displaying a different document. "Commissioner, I pulled the internal communications you requested. These are emails between Walsh and various command staff members discussing how to handle complaints against Langford." Isaiah took the tablet and read through the messages. Each one was more damning than the last. Walsh coordinating with supervisors to bury evidence, command staff agreeing to transfer complaining officers to undesirable assignments, union representatives threatening whistleblowers with professional consequences. "How many people were involved in the cover-ups?" Isaiah asked. Holloway's expression was grim. At least 15 supervisors, 8 command staff members, and multiple union officials. This goes all the way to the deputy chief level. Sutton, who had just finished his phone calls, looked stricken. "You're saying this corruption extends into the command structure?" Isaiah met his gaze directly. "Deputy Chief Sutton, where were you when these complaints were being filed? When victims were coming forward? When the evidence was being systematically destroyed?" Sutton's face went pale. I was focused on operational efficiency, crime statistics, public relations." "You were willfully blind," Isaiah stated flatly, "and that willful blindness allowed this corruption to metastasize until it infected nearly every level of this department." He set down the tablet and addressed everyone in the room. "Tomorrow's press conference isn't just about Derek Langford. It's about acknowledging that this entire department failed.
We failed the community. We failed our oath. We failed the victims who trusted us to deliver justice. Morrison spoke up from her position near the evidence boxes. Commissioner, the Bureau is prepared to offer complete support for the prosecutions. We have resources, expertise, and most importantly, the jurisdiction to ensure these cases can't be buried or minimized. Isaiah thanked her with a nod. We'll need all of that, because what happens next isn't going to be easy. He pulled up a final document on the main monitor, a comprehensive reform proposal that outlined sweeping changes to department policies, accountability measures, and community oversight structures. This is the blueprint for rebuilding this department from the ground up. New training protocols, civilian review boards with subpoena power, mandatory body cameras that can't be disabled, psychological evaluations for all officers, and most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for civil rights violations. Holloway studied the document carefully. This is going to meet fierce resistance. Isaiah's smile was cold. Let them resist. Every officer who objects to these reforms is telling us they want to continue operating without accountability. They're identifying themselves as part of the problem. He checked his watch. It was approaching midnight. In 10 hours, the carefully constructed world of Derek Langford and his network of corrupt officers would collapse. In 10 hours, the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department would begin the painful process of confronting its own failures. Everyone go home and get some rest, Isaiah instructed. Tomorrow, we start the real work of transforming this department. As the team filed out, Morrison lingered behind. Isaiah, she said quietly, what you went through, being arrested, brutalized, treated like a criminal. Most people in your position would want revenge. Isaiah touched the fading bruise on his cheek. This isn't about revenge, Linda. It's about ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. It's about proving that the system can still deliver justice when the people running it actually care about justice. Morrison nodded and left Isaiah alone in the command center, surrounded by evidence of years of corruption. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end for officers like Derek Langford. But more importantly, it would be the beginning of something new, a police department that actually served and protected rather than brutalized and exploited. Isaiah gathered his materials and prepared for the most important press conference of his career. The city of Detroit was about to learn just how deeply their police department had betrayed them. And Derek Langford was about to learn what accountability actually looked like. The Detroit Metropolitan Police Department headquarters press room filled rapidly with reporters, camera crews, and city officials. By 9:45 a.m., every seat was occupied, and journalists lined the walls, their cameras and recording devices focused on the empty podium bearing the department's seal. Derek Langford stood in a small holding area adjacent to the press room, flanked by two internal affairs investigators. His uniform looked rumpled despite having been pressed that morning. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed 3 nights of minimal sleep. Beside him, Kyle Brennan stared at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. Union Representative Vincent Castellano paced nearby, his phone pressed to his ear as he conducted urgent conversations with union leadership. His attempts to delay or cancel the press conference had failed completely. Commissioner Carter had made it clear. The officers could attend voluntarily or be escorted by federal marshals. Either way, they would be present. Inside the press room, Mayor Patricia Thornton took her seat in the front row, her expression carefully neutral despite the political storm she knew was coming. Beside her sat members of the city council, community leaders, and several people whose faces Langford didn't recognize, but whose presence suggested they were victims waiting to see justice delivered. At precisely 10 a.m., Isaiah Carter entered through a side door. He wore his official dress uniform for the first time, dark blue with gold insignia, his commissioner's badge polished to a mirror shine. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a yellowish purple, but remained clearly visible, a physical reminder of what had sparked this moment. The room fell silent as Isaiah took his position at the podium. He adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the assembled cameras. "Good morning. My name is Isaiah Carter, and I am the police commissioner of the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department. 3 days ago, I was assaulted and unlawfully arrested by one of our own officers while walking to my first day of work." The directness of his opening statement sent a ripple through the crowd. No preamble, no softening language, no attempt to minimize what had occurred. "I'm not here today to discuss my personal experience, though it will be part of the public record. I'm here to address a far more serious problem, a pattern of corruption, brutality, and systematic civil rights violations that has infected this department for over a decade." Isaiah nodded to Captain Holloway, who activated a large display screen behind the podium. The screen filled with data, arrest statistics, complaint records, financial transactions, and video evidence that had been compiled over the past 72 hours. "What you're seeing represents the results of a comprehensive investigation involving this department, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. We have documented a criminal enterprise operating within the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department that has resulted in millions of dollars in stolen assets, hundreds of false arrests, and countless victims whose constitutional rights were violated." He gestured to the financial data on the screen. 43 officers received illegal payments through a front company called Guardian Protection Services. These payments incentivized aggressive policing in specific neighborhoods, targeting vulnerable populations who lacked resources to fight back. A reporter raised her hand. "Commissioner Carter, are you saying this was organized crime?" Isaiah met her gaze directly. "I'm saying exactly that. This was a criminal conspiracy involving sworn police officers who used their badges as cover for theft, assault, and fraud. They stole property under the guise of civil asset forfeiture. They fabricated arrests to justify violence. They destroyed evidence to protect themselves from accountability." He advanced to the next slide, showing Lieutenant Gregory Walsh's photograph alongside his financial records. Lieutenant Gregory Walsh has been arrested by federal agents and charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. He received over $360,000 in illegal payments while orchestrating a network that protected corrupt officers from investigation. The room erupted with questions, but Isaiah raised his hand for silence. "There's more." The display changed to show a series of case files. Over the past 5 years, this department has paid out $8.3 million in settlements and judgments related to officer misconduct. $8.3 million taxpayer dollars used to cover up brutality, false arrests, and civil rights violations. He paused, letting the figure sink in. That's money that could have funded community programs, improved equipment, or provided better training. Instead, it was spent protecting officers who viewed their badge as a license to abuse power. Isaiah stepped away from the podium and gestured toward the holding area. "Officer Derek Langford, please step forward." Langford's legs felt like lead as he walked into the press room. Camera flashes exploded like strobe lights. He could feel hundreds of eyes boring into him, judging him, condemning him. "Officer Langford has been with this department for 12 years, Isaiah continued. During that time, he made 847 arrests. He also generated 31 formal complaints, 12 excessive force citations, and cost taxpayers nearly $1 million in settlements." Isaiah pulled up video footage on the display. Not from his own arrest, but from other incidents. The screen showed Langford slamming a teenager against a car hood, screaming profanity at an elderly woman during a traffic stop, kicking a handcuffed suspect who was already on the ground. Each clip ran for only seconds, but the cumulative effect was devastating. This wasn't one bad moment. This was a pattern stretching across years. "Officer Langford believed he was untouchable," Isaiah said quietly. "He believed the system would always protect him, just as it had protected him 31 times before. He was wrong." Isaiah turned to face Langford directly. "Officer Derek Langford, you are hereby terminated from the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department effective immediately. You will surrender your badge, your weapon, and your credentials. Federal charges will be filed within 48 hours."
Castellano stepped forward, his voice sharp with anger. "Commissioner Carter, the union will fight this termination. Officer Langford has rights, due process. He has the same rights as every person he brutalized, the same due process he denied to hundreds of citizens, the same presumption of innocence he stripped from people based solely on their appearance." He addressed Castellano directly. "Mr. Castellano, if the union wishes to defend Officer Langford's conduct, you're welcome to do so in federal court. But you should know that defending him means defending a system of corruption that has destroyed this department's credibility and betrayed the community we serve." Isaiah returned his attention to the assembled press. 17 additional officers will face disciplinary action ranging from suspension to termination. 8 supervisors have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and we are reopening over 400 cases where evidence suggests civil rights violations may have occurred. Mayor Thornton stood, her expression grave. "Commissioner Carter has my full support in this effort. The citizens of Detroit deserve a police department they can trust. What we've learned over the past 3 days is unacceptable and will not be tolerated." A reporter called out another question. "Commissioner, you were personally victimized by Officer Langford. How do you maintain objectivity in this investigation?" Isaiah's response was measured. "My personal experience opened my eyes to a problem I already knew existed. But this investigation isn't about me. It's about the grandmother who was body slammed during a traffic stop, the teenager who was beaten for talking back, the veteran who was tased for having a prosthetic leg." He gestured to the front row, where several of Marcus Webb's clients sat. "These are the people this investigation serves. Their voices have been silenced for too long. Their experiences have been dismissed and minimized. That ends today." Attorney Marcus Webb stood, his hand resting supportively on the shoulder of an older woman beside him. "Commissioner Carter has done in 3 days what we've been fighting for in court for 3 years. He's exposed the truth. My clients and I are grateful that someone finally had the courage to hold this department accountable." Isaiah nodded his acknowledgement, then turned back to the cameras. "Effective immediately, the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department will implement comprehensive reforms, mandatory body cameras that cannot be disabled, civilian review boards with subpoena power, psychological evaluations for all officers, and most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for civil rights violations." He pulled out a document and held it up. "This is a consent decree negotiated with the Department of Justice. It places this department under federal oversight for a minimum of 5 years. Every policy, every procedure, every use of force will be monitored and evaluated." The room erupted again with questions, but Isaiah's time at the podium was ending. He had delivered the message he came to deliver. The rest would unfold in courtrooms, disciplinary hearings, and the long process of rebuilding trust. "Derek Langford will face justice," Isaiah concluded. "So will every officer who participated in this corruption. But more importantly, the victims who have suffered in silence will finally be heard. Their experiences will matter. Their dignity will be restored." He stepped away from the podium as the press room exploded with shouted questions. Isaiah walked past Langford without acknowledging him, past the cameras and the chaos, and out of the room. In the holding area, Langford stood motionless, his world completely shattered. The badge he had worn for 12 years felt impossibly heavy. The uniform that had given him authority now felt like a costume he had no right to wear. An internal affairs investigator approached him. "Your badge and weapon, Officer Langford." "Former Officer Langford," another investigator corrected. Derek fumbled with his badge, his fingers clumsy and numb. As he handed over the piece of metal that had defined his identity for over a decade, reality crashed down on him with crushing finality. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His freedom was likely measured in hours rather than years. And the man whose life he had tried to ruin with a single act of casual brutality had just dismantled everything Langford had built, exposing not just his crimes, but the entire system that had enabled them. Justice had arrived, and it was absolutely merciless.
6 months after the press conference that shook Detroit to its foundation, the city's police department looked fundamentally different. The changes weren't cosmetic or symbolic. They were structural, deep, and irreversible. Isaiah Carter stood in the newly renovated Community Oversight Office, watching as civilian board members reviewed use of force reports with the same authority that had once been reserved exclusively for police supervisors. The board included teachers, social workers, small business owners, and retired judges. Every demographic of Detroit was represented, and their questions were pointed and unforgiving. "Commissioner, how do you explain this pattern?" Board member Angela Robertson pointed to a chart showing deployment statistics. "Officers are still being assigned disproportionately to minority neighborhoods, even after the reforms." Isaiah studied the data carefully. "You're correct, and that's a legacy problem we're actively addressing. We've implemented new deployment algorithms that factor in call volume, crime rates, and community requests rather than outdated assumptions about where police presence is needed." He pulled up a comparison chart. 6 months ago, the Riverside District had 3 times the police presence of comparable neighborhoods. Today, deployment is balanced across the city. Response times have actually improved because resources are allocated based on need rather than prejudice. Robertson nodded, making notes. The board would publish their findings in a public report accessible to every Detroit resident. Transparency wasn't optional anymore. It was mandated by the consent decree and embedded in the department's new operating procedures. Across town, in a federal courtroom, Derek Langford sat beside his attorney as the prosecution presented its case. The charges were extensive: civil rights violations, conspiracy, fraud, and assault. Each count was supported by mountains of evidence that Isaiah's team had compiled with meticulous precision. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Hayes held up body camera footage on a tablet. "Members of the jury, this is the 37th incident we've documented where the defendant used excessive force against a civilian. Note the pattern. Every victim is a person of color. Every arrest involves fabricated charges. Every report contains identical justification language." Langford's attorney, an expensive defense lawyer named Richard Kellerman, had tried every strategy to minimize his client's culpability. He argued that Langford was following department culture, that he was inadequately trained, that he was a scapegoat for systematic failures. The jury wasn't buying it. They had seen too much evidence, heard too many victim testimonies, and watched too many videos of Langford's brutality to believe he was anything other than a criminal who had hidden behind a badge. In a rehabilitation center on the city's east side, Terrence Johnson attended a community meeting about police reform. 6 months ago, he had been too afraid to speak publicly about his experience with Officer Langford. Today, he stood before 50 neighbors and shared his story without shame or fear. "They took everything from me," Terrence said, his voice steady. "My car, my savings, my dignity. I thought no one would ever care because I was just another black man in the wrong place at the wrong time." He gestured to Marcus Webb, who sat in the front row. "But Attorney Webb fought for me, and Commissioner Carter made sure that fight actually mattered. Last month, I got a settlement check that will let me rebuild my business. More importantly, I got an apology from the department, a real apology, not some lawyer-written statement." The crowd applauded, and Terrence felt something he hadn't experienced in years when dealing with law enforcement: respect. At Detroit Metropolitan Police Academy, recruits in the new training program learned a curriculum that looked nothing like what Derek Langford had experienced. Instead of warrior mentality training that taught officers to view civilians as threats, they studied de-escalation techniques, constitutional law, and community psychology. Instructor Sarah Chen, a 20-year veteran who had witnessed the department's darkest days, addressed her class with unwavering seriousness. "The badge you'll receive doesn't make you superior to the people you serve. It makes you accountable to them. Every interaction you have will be recorded, reviewed, and evaluated, not just by your supervisors, but by civilian oversight boards." A recruit raised his hand. "What happens if we make a mistake?" Chen's response was immediate. "If you make an honest mistake while trying to do your job correctly, the department will support you. If you abuse your authority, fabricate evidence, or violate someone's constitutional rights, you'll be prosecuted. There's no middle ground anymore." The message was clear. The culture that had protected officers like Langford was dead. What replaced it demanded integrity, accountability, and genuine service.
Lieutenant Gregory Walsh's trial had concluded 2 weeks earlier. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Walsh received a 15-year federal prison sentence and was ordered to forfeit every dollar he had earned through Guardian Protection Services. During sentencing, the judge had been unsparing in her condemnation. You perverted your position of authority to operate a criminal enterprise. You betrayed the officers who looked to you for leadership. You destroyed the trust between law enforcement and the community. Your actions have set back police-community relations by decades. Walsh was currently housed in the same federal facility where several officers he once had commanded were also serving time. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Isaiah sat in his office late one evening reviewing the department's transformation metrics. Crime rates were down despite, or perhaps because of the reduction in aggressive policing tactics. Community trust surveys showed significant improvement. Recruitment applications had increased as people who actually wanted to serve their community applied to join a department they could respect. His phone rang. It was FBI agent Linda Morrison. Isaiah, thought you'd want to know. The Justice Department is using your Detroit model as a template for consent decree implementations in 6 other cities. What you've accomplished here is becoming a national standard. Isaiah absorbed this information, quietly. That's good, but we're not done here. Culture change takes years, not months. We've made progress, but there are still officers who resent the reforms, community members who don't trust us, and systematic problems we haven't fully addressed. Morrison's laugh was warm. Always the perfectionist. Take the win, Isaiah. You fundamentally transformed one of the country's most corrupt police departments. That matters. After ending the call, Isaiah walked to his window overlooking the city. Lights twinkled across Detroit's neighborhoods, homes where families lived, worked, and tried to build better lives. Those families deserved police officers who protected rather than preyed upon them. His mind drifted to that morning 6 months ago when Derek Langford had slammed him against a brick wall. At the time, the assault had felt like pure injustice, a powerful reminder of how far the system had fallen. But in retrospect, that moment had been a catalyst. It had exposed corruption that might have festered for years longer. It had given victims a voice they had been denied. It had proven that accountability was possible when someone with authority actually cared about delivering it. Derek Langford would spend the next 8 years in federal prison after his conviction on 17 counts. Kyle Brennan received 4 years for his complicity. 41 other officers faced disciplinary actions ranging from suspension to termination. The department's command structure had been completely reorganized, with new leadership committed to the reformed culture. More importantly, the 418 cases Langford had touched were being systematically reviewed. Dozens of wrongful convictions had been overturned. Hundreds of people had their records expunged. The civil rights lawsuit that Marcus Webb had filed was settled for $42 million, with each victim receiving compensation and a formal acknowledgement of the harm done to them.
Isaiah's computer chimed with a new email. It was from Angela Robertson, the Civilian Oversight Board member. Commissioner Carter, the board has completed our 6-month review. We're recommending that the consent decree remain in place for the full 5 years. But we are also noting that Detroit has become a model for what police reform can achieve when leadership is committed to real change. Thank you for proving that accountability is possible. Isaiah read the email twice, then closed his laptop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always new challenges. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The department that had once brutalized its own commissioner was now a department that prioritized constitutional policing, community trust, and genuine accountability. The transformation wasn't complete. It might never be complete, but it was real, measurable, and meaningful. Derek Langford had thought he was teaching Isaiah a lesson that morning when he called him street trash and slammed him against a wall. Instead, Langford had learned the most expensive lesson of his life, that justice doesn't care about your badge, your connections, or how many times you've gotten away with abuse. Justice only cares about truth. And in Detroit, truth had finally prevailed. Isaiah turned off his office lights and headed home, knowing that when he returned tomorrow, the work of building a better police department would continue. Not because it was easy or politically convenient, but because the people of Detroit deserved nothing less. The badge he wore didn't make him superior to the people he served. It made him accountable to them. And that, ultimately, was exactly how it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.